by your light. Let my vision come to be. Far burn bright, breathe the words deep inside of me.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Kindling the Hearthfire, a podcast dedicated to bringing together the people of ADF around the same fire. How is everyone doing this Equinox? I hope everyone that is planning to celebrate will be having a great time. I know I will. Next Saturday is my Protogrows ritual and potluck, and I just can't wait. Right now, you can find our podcast on Stitcher, iTunes, Podbean, and on Patreon. I would generally really appreciate any and all reviews, but I would especially appreciate ones on iTunes because it makes it easier for people to find our podcast. I also want to mention that the podcast has been rated explicit on iTunes for some reason, so look out for that if you want to look us up there. On Patreon, I am in the process of setting up differing levels of patronage, each with their own rewards and privileges. I won't go into detail here, but if you want to help support the podcast, check out the page on Patreon to get details. All websites will be listed with links in the show notes as per usual. Now on to the rest of the podcast. Last time we had a brief discussion of Lunasaw and how it's celebrated in parts of Ireland even today. This time we are going to be shaking things up a bit because instead of hearing me talk about this time of year, I have been given the privilege of having one of my favorite bloggers give a brief explanation as well as some things you can actually do during this time of year. So without further ado, let's give it a listen.
Howdy everybody, my name is Chris Godwin, also called Shaunoja. I'm from the Blueface Druid blog and Hearthstone Grove, ADF. I'm here to talk to you about Mid-Harvest, also called Michaelmas, not a holiday of the land's response to the season and therefore the sun. So, folks are focused more on tribal affairs than they are on the sun or what it's doing. In fact, Michaelmas is a full 7 days after the equinox. So the things that folks are getting ready for is a week after the holiday that folks practice today. It's important to know that this holiday, Mid-Harvest, named that because it's the second of 3 harvests, is misnamed in the neo-pagan community as Mabon. Mabon was given as a name to this holiday by Aidan Kelly of the New Reformed Order of the Golden Dawn. Celtic pagans generally don't use it because the deity Mabon has nothing to do with mid-harvest or mid-harvest celebrations. Mabon is a deity from the Mabinogion, from Welsh lore, and as Irish pagans, I wouldn't use it. What we call it instead is the goose harvest or mid-harvest. The way we say that in Irish is Manfawar. We also feel that folks celebrating this time would just look back to Lunasa and continue in those worship patterns. The reason why we say this is because St. Michael's best cognate is Lu. And even Alexei Kondrativ in the Apple branch discusses how, where in the areas where St. Michael was not worshipped, practices to Lu are prevalent. So I plan on taking you through a vision today of an Irish village. Imagine early medieval Ireland when the summer becomes mild in late September. The autumnal equinox was 6 days prior. It was harvest time, and people were focused on the land's response to the sun. The first harvest of Lunasa is already behind the villagers, and in the village square there is someone being flogged for being one of the White Boys, a gang of vandals who stand up to the lords. The nobles have recently moved the dates to pay rent in their favor from November Day to Michaelmas. Tales about how rent must be paid 6 weeks earlier are being sung among the folk. It didn't make sense to change rent until after all the crops were harvested. Tomorrow is Michaelmas, September 29th, and everyone is prepared. Last night the farming folks brought in the ripened crops because it was a full moon. This is the second harvest. Everything must go exactly according to plan. All week the folks were fervently cleaning and readying and fixing things. The houses were set in order. Carts were repaired for transporting the corn and produce to markets. The animal husbandmen had been looking after the oxen and horses throughout the summer, readying them for the journey ahead. Most farms had already picked out a goose or cock from their pick for Michaelmas dinner. The villagers in the market square are getting ready for the fishermen who are also in harvest at this time. Farmers from all around will trade. Horse racing and bull baiting are big pastimes for the folk. The whiskey brewers and makers of mead start their fermentation on Michaelmas, and the lower grade spirits will be ready in time to warm the folks for winter. The lucky women pulling carrots find ones that are forked and find great luck with it. They say joyful charms over the harvest when luck finds them this way. For the rich, it is a custom to donate a sheep or a goose for the unfortunate. Compassion is a strong tradition among the Irish people, especially in this time of celebration and abundance. Out in public, mayors take office and the people do business, while in secret the witches and druids, which still remain, pay their rents and renew their bargains they have with their gods. Families eat straw on Michael, or St. Michael's bannocks, each household on edge, keeping all their work precise, because if the bannock broke before baking, it was an ill omen for the baker. If after baking it broke, it meant ill for the entire family. In the old days, Lugh the hero won the corn from the land by battling Crom Duv. Some believers in the old ways make offerings to Lugh to aid him in his battles to win remaining harvests, though they may do their observations alone because this is a holiday of the Christ's faith and not one of the fire festivals. We see in our minds our villagers falling fast asleep, and as we leave this vision of our Irish village on Michaelmas Eve, let us reflect on the effort expended by these people and that of our ancestors. Their work met a hierarchy of needs that enables us to look back upon them. Let us look back with honor and worship to the holy ones.
Thank you so much to Chris Godwin for creating such a lovely piece for the podcast. You can find more on his wonderful blog, The Blue-Faced Druid. I will give links to that in the show notes. Now on to the other submissions.
So the harvest festivals are probably my favorite of the Wheel of the Year, though I don't usually have anything specific I do to celebrate other than attending local rituals. The autumn equinox is when I generally feel closest to nature, and I tend to find ways to work on connecting with that the most into my daily life. Through September and October, the sunrise changes from about 6:45 to 7:30 in the morning, which is right during my morning commute, and it's kind of just a nice, really noticeable shift that keeps me more aware of the seasons changing. And usually by being more aware of that in general, I just kind of start paying attention on a daily basis and noticing things that maybe I tune out during the rest of the year. For example, nesting season just ended for a lot of local birds, and it can be really cool to watch and listen for their behavior changing. Canada geese start migrating soon, and they're pretty notable because they're huge and loud birds, and they're really common in local parks and universities and stuff, and it's cool to just kind of go about my day and then at some point notice a bunch of honking geese flying in the sky and just kind of knowing that that's what's going on there, attending to their needs for the season. I wanted to suggest a couple ways that everyone can use to tune in more with nature. One thing that doesn't really take any extra effort is just to try to pay more attention to the nature that you kind of have the opportunity to see every day. Some people are really lucky, they live more out in the country and they can just kind of see more nature in between the various buildings, but even in a large city there are still trees and birds and squirrels and other animals that adjust to the seasons, even if it's just the kind of more common ones that you think, oh, it's just a squirrel. It can bring a little joy to my day when I get to see an animal just kind of doing their thing, and it takes me out of my inner life of like to-do lists and so on, just to kind of stop for a second and look at a tree or a bird or something. Another activity that can be done fairly quickly is to find a natural object like a shell or like a seed, a rock, or a stick, and just set a timer for maybe 2 to 3 minutes. And then just sit for those couple of minutes and use all of your senses to really observe that one thing really closely. It's easy to take a lot of the ordinary objects for granted, but there's a lot of detail, I think. So shape and texture can tell about the function of something or its history, where it kind of maybe broke off of a larger object, and what that means for like what it may have gone through before you picked it up. You can find like the slight differences in shades of color, even of like brown or gray that we normally kind of write off, where it is shiny or matte. I don't recommend tasting unless you're particularly certain of what it is and where it comes from, like a vegetable from your own garden, but you can definitely use smell. I like to look for kind of, quote, imperfect objects, because it's more normal, at least for me, to orient towards finding like the really perfect pine cone that's really symmetrical, or a particularly pretty rock. But if it's been ripped up by a squirrel or simply fallen apart after falling onto the sidewalk, I think it's really good to appreciate the less picturesque things for what they are and what kind of story they can tell. Use your intuition as well. You can wonder about what it could symbolize, or see how you could relate it to your life experiences, or people or other things it can remind you of. I like to set a timer to kind of give a minimum time to observe. I find that there's a lot of information you can get when really looking for about a minute, and pushing yourself to go for a little extra time means you can't just stop after getting through the obvious traits. It can also make for a really nice focus for meditating if you want to do like a longer, less purposeful exploration. So I hope that these tips help you connect with nature a little more, and I also hope everyone has a wonderful equinox. Thank you for listening.
Hello, this is Joan Hyatt, aka Jan Tiered from Coast Oak Grove in San Diego, California. I am really happy to talk about the fall equinox because it's one of my favorite high days, mostly because it leads to Samhain, which is my favorite high day, and it's really a great time to celebrate the coming of fall and truly the end of summer, and be able to celebrate Frey. Frey is the god that I like to celebrate around this time, mostly because I really celebrate the harvest, even though we have harvest all year round. I mean, we have whatever we want whenever we want it now, thanks to globalization and grocery stores and everything. So pretty much anything we want we have. But I like to keep the celebration of this time because it really makes me stop and think and truly make a big offering about how grateful we are for the harvest. And many times in the past, or in our ancient days, the ancient people were really tied to the seasonal times, and they were really tied to what they could harvest at that time. So I'm really grateful that we have harvest all the time, and this is a great way to take a moment to really give thanks for that, and to appreciate, in my tradition, Frey, for his blessings and the things that he's done to make all of this possible for us. With our grove, what we like to get together, we get together in one of our unusual places. It's usual now because we do that every year at the same place, but it's not our normal beach location or in the Oak Grove location where we normally hold our rituals. So it's really nice because it takes us out of that normal routine, and we really get to focus on the time, and we usually have the ritual on the evening, so we're preparing for the equal time of day and night, or celebrating the equal time of day and night. And that's another opportunity here, is we get to celebrate the balance and celebrate how it tips over basically from the summer to the fall. And it's really noticeable after Equinox for me. I start to really notice a lot of changes in the season as we move into fall and towards Samhain, which really get to celebrate our ancestors at that point. Another thing that I like to do around the fall equinox, and this happens a lot during the year, but around the equinox time, I really look forward to seeing Mani or Sol, the moon and the sun, in the sky at the same time, and that's normally really prevalent in the mornings when I can see that. And I really think it's so cool where the moon, Mani, is setting in the west as Sol, Suna, is rising in the east, and to me that's just really a great balancing of energies. And I like to take a moment to suck in those energies, to absorb them, and to really be a part of it. And I think that the equinox is a great time to kind of double up on that energy, because we're right in that balancing time where the energies are about being in balance, and it helps me to reassess myself as well, and to look at the things that I'm doing, and try to set a balance for myself. So I'm really excited about the equinox and the coming fall and Samhain, and thank you for this opportunity to share those thoughts with you all on this podcast, and have a great equinox celebration.
Hi, this is the Reverend Rob Henderson from Shining Lakes Grove. I was asked to talk a bit about what we do for fall equinox. Way back about 20 years ago or so, when I first joined Shining Lakes, we had a horn dance based on the Abbott's Bromley horn dance. We actually called it the Stag Dance. And we had 4 people dancing in a circle. One had a carved wooden deer head with real deer antlers attached to it that they would dance around with, and others wore kind of just headbands with antlers on them. Our intent was to eventually carve a new head, so we'd have all 4 people dancing around with the carved wooden heads with the antlers in them. And then we had a choreographed pattern to dance around to, and then at the end we would all break out into the circle and lead everyone in a big dance. We probably did that for about 6 or 7 years, but then it turned out that our Grove members just weren't that energetic and really weren't into doing a big dance as an offering, so that kind of fell by the wayside. We do still have the original stag head with the antlers, and it is in place of pride on our nature spirit shrine during our high day rituals, but we don't do the dance with it anymore. These days we've shifted over more to honoring our river goddess Anna, because as we feel that she brings the life to the land as part of her living/dominion in the area around the Huron River, she's responsible for the growth of the plants. And with the first harvest being back at Lunasaw for the grains, the second harvest, the fruit harvest taking place around now, and then the third harvest, the meat harvest, happening at Samhain, we honor her for all of those. And this being the fruit harvest, we celebrate by offering fruits out into the area around the circle, asking for a bountiful harvest. We often bring in things from our own garden that have grown to offer them. Small amounts, obviously. We don't want to give the whole thing away, but giving some of that back to Anna and the nature spirits. We started shifting it over and made it more of a nature spirits thing as the kindred of the occasion rather than the deity of the occasion. But after a while, it was kind of like, well, if Anna's the one who's bringing the life to the land, then we really need to have her be a deity of the occasion, and we can honor the nature spirits at the same time as a kindred of the occasion. So, and that's what we've been doing for about 5 or 10 years now. Seems to be working out well for us. We'll be going out this weekend with a great big cornucopia, filling it with apples and the little tiny pumpkins and gourds that we get for decorations this time of year, and making offerings of them into the woods. And that is what we do for fall equinox.
That was lovely. Thank you all for taking time out of your definitely busy schedules to create and contribute such lovely pieces and share your celebrations with us. Next up, we will be featuring a recipe for this time of year. It's kind of a funny story how I got turned on to this particular recipe or idea. Someone posted on the Facebook page about how she loved the idea of making bowls out of round squashes and using them for soup bowls. We messaged back and forth on the page, and I found out that she had posted that idea to the wrong group, but I still loved the idea. I scoured the internet looking for recipes and found one that sounds delicious and fun, featuring acorn squashes that are hollowed out and turned into bowls for a creamy fall soup. Let's see here. It's a little under 10 ingredients, and it's a creamy fall soup with carrots and butternut squash, and they're placed in roasted acorn squash bowls. Another idea that I actually thought of is just taking the acorn squash itself and actually hollowing that out and adding that also to the soup to kind of bring in the acorn squash flavor and kind of round it out. This particular idea sounds like almost the ultimate healthy comfort food for this fall and winter. The author of this particular recipe that I found is the Minimalist Baker, and I'll give her website, or actually I don't really know if it's a him or her. I'll give their website in the show notes as well, so you can take a look at the pictures, which are beautiful, and get all the directions for exactly how to put this soup together. It's a really simple recipe, but seeing the recipe in front of you is probably a lot easier than just hearing me talk about it. But just to give you a brief idea of what this entails, I'm going to just give you a list of the 10 ingredients that this includes. For the squash themselves, you all have 2 acorn squashes, halved and hollowed out to create the bowls. You have 1 tablespoon melted coconut oil, or grapeseed or avocado oil, or any kind of oil that you would prefer and like the taste of. And then 2 tablespoons, or to taste, of maple syrup. And basically what you're going to be doing with that is you're basically baking the bowls after they've been hollowed out, or before they've been hollowed out, to make it easier to get the squash out of the squash to make the bowls. Okay? And for the soup itself, it's really simple. You've got coconut oil, onion, garlic, cubed sweet potato, carrots, or butternut squash, or a mixture of them. And you've got vegetable broth. You have sage, dried thyme, or bay leaves, or whatever spices you think would make it taste a lot better. And an optional ingredient she has in there is red lentils for the protein and the fiber, if you're trying to be a little bit more healthy, because squash tends to be a little bit heavy on the carby stuff, or sugars. And then there's salt and pepper to taste, and maple syrup, of course, to add a little bit more sweetness to your soup. And she also mentions that you can have kale chips, red onion, chickpeas, parsley, and cornbread for a kind of a garnish for the soup to like sprinkle over or to add with the soup as well. Yeah, this is a really simple recipe. I'll put the links to the recipe in the show notes so you can see the complete and full recipe with all the directions and pictures and everything for you. But it just is a really great and really simple idea. It sounds to me very festive and extremely yummy. If you have a recipe you would like to hear featured on this podcast, please send it to kindlingthehearthfire@gmail.com or post it at the podcast's Facebook page or on the Facebook group. Okay, next segment is going to be our book review. Okay, this time around we are going to be looking at a book by John Beckett, who also has a blog on Patheos under the Oaks. Today we are going to be looking at a book by John Beckett, who also has a blog on Patheos called Under the Ancient Oaks. The book is called The Path of Paganism and is a really good read and very informative even to the non-beginner or veteran of the pagan path. He took his blog as a starting point for the book and fleshed it out with new material to give it a better flow, as well as give new material for those who have already read the blog itself. Each section has tons of information, and the exercises at the end of each part are great and really give you a lot to think about, whether you are just beginning to flesh out your beliefs or have a solid foundation to build on. In an interview on the Pagans Musings podcast, another great podcast if you want to listen to the latest news from a pagan perspective, Beckett made it clear that he wanted to create a book that was useful for everyone, and I am of the firm belief that he succeeded. I especially loved his altar section, where he gives a practice I use regularly a name and validated my practice in a very real way. I read through the book first to get a grasp on what the author is going for before I invested myself in working through the exercises, and found that at every turn that this book was one that I could have loved to have at the beginning of my path, but I love it even more now that I have found it. This is definitely a book that belongs on the bookshelf for many years to come. I picked it up on Amazon for my Kindle, but it is available in print as well as on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and just about any other book retailer available. I will put a link to both the blog and the book in the show notes. Now on to the next segment, which is the calendar. Alright, well, first up on our calendar is coming up in the next couple days, actually around here, is the Sacramento Pagan Pride Day. And it, of course, is going to be happening in Sacramento on the 17th and 18th of September. And you can find more information on their website, which is sacpaganpride.wixsite.com/sacpaganpride, and that's all one word. I will put links in the bottom of the page just in case you missed that. So you can actually go to that website and find out more information about what's going on, the parking situation, what the admission fee is, and just general information of what's going on at the Sacramento Pagan Pride Festival. And it's going to be located in Fair Oaks, California, which is just outside of Sacramento. If you want particular location details, that's also located on the website as well. Okay, and next up, on the 18th of September, we have the Columbia Willamette Pagan Pride Day. And this is going to be in Portland, Oregon. Their Facebook page, by typing in Columbia Williamette Pagan Pride Day, and once again I'll be putting more links to these pages so you can find more information on where it's going to be and the timing and how to get there. It's once again going to be in Portland, Oregon on the 17th and 18th of September. Okay, and next up is going to be Hexenfest, a festival of myth, music, and magic, as it's defined on their website. This is going to be happening on September 28th through October 1st over in Geyserville, California. And their website, if you want to get more information on what's going on there and how to get tickets and what's happening and where they're located, it's at hexenfest.net is their main page. After that is going to be the Rocky Mountain Retreat, which is an ADF run festival, and it's going to be running from October 14th through the 16th. It's going to be in the Denver, Colorado area at the Bonnie Brae. And to find more information on how to get there and what's going to be going on, their website is chokecherryadf, all one word, .org. Okay, and next up, we're going to be having Harvest Nights Gathering, and that's going to be running October 21st through the 23rd, and once again, it's going to be at Camp Bonnie Brae, but this time it's going to be in Otis, Massachusetts. Similar name, different location. And to find out more information on where that's going to be located and more information on what's going to actually be going on down there is going to be at charteroakadf, all one word, .org /harvest-nights. Okay, and that's it for the calendar. Alright, wrapping up, I would like first to thank you all for your submissions, and I would especially like to thank Bonnie Landry, who you heard in the intro with Fire Burn Bright. Next up, we're going to be getting ready to put the next podcast together here at the Kindling of the Hearthfire. And if you have any ideas, celebrations, poems, songs, invocations, or anything else that you'd like to hear included in the podcast, please send them to kindlingthehearthfire@gmail.com. I would also love to see pictures of your celebrations. Either post them to the Facebook group or on Instagram with the hashtag KTH. Deadline for submissions for the next podcast is October 21st, and tune in Saturday, October 28th for another episode of Kindling the Hearthfire. You can find our podcast on Stitcher, iTunes, Podbean, and on Patreon. Be well, and may you continue to pray with a good fire.